Another way of handling the dart intake on a pattern, instead of actually folding the intake, you can add seam allowance. So on this pattern, I folded the intake, we drew in the new dart legs, and we folded it and we blended it so that we can get this shape. But if you're working on a fabric where maybe it's see-through and you don't want to see that shape in there, or maybe it's really thick and you want to eliminate some of the bulk, you can add seam allowance. So what I did was I transferred the same waist dart to the armhole, and I'm going to show you how to add seam allowance. You are still going to put paper underneath, and we are going to secure it. Some of the steps are the same. I'm going to be measuring my dart intake because I'm trying to find the center. So I'm going to find the center of that. I'm at about 2 1/8, so 1 1/16. I'm going to indicate that and draw a line from the apex through the center of my dart. We're going to continue with the 1 inch back off. So I am measuring 1 inch from my apex and indicating on this center line, and I'm going to draw in my new dart legs. So again, just take the ruler. This is where your notch is going to go. So we're going to draw in the leg on this side, and we're going to draw in the leg on this side. It's really important to go back in and draw your new dart legs. A lot of times students forget and they think that this opening is the new dart, but you have to have a back off point from your apex. So once you have those dart legs in, we're going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance. So basically I'm adding a 1/2 inch seam allowance to this dart leg. So I'm using my ruler and I'm putting the 1/2 inch mark right inside that line, and I'm going to do this. Okay, so I'm adding a 1/2 inch seam allowance to this dart leg. It's not going to extend all the way to the top. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This is my dart leg. I'm going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once I've added the seam allowance, I'm going to square that seam allowance. So that means from my stitch line, which is my dart leg, I need a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to place my ruler here, right in this corner, and I'm squaring away from my stitch line. So this basically is a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm squaring away from my stitch line. So I'm going to cut this out. I'm cutting this area, and I'm cutting away the intake. I don't need the intake anymore because I have 1/2 inch seam allowance. Sometimes if you're maybe doing a curved dart or where the dart is located, you might not want a 1/2 inch. You could also do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Both are correct. So again, you don't want this. You don't want all this paper flopping around. So we're going to cut off what's not needed. And then we are going to secure the back with tape. Even on the job, we use a lot of tape. So once I have the seam allowance marked, you're going to have notches. I'm going to indicate them in blue so that you can see. And that's telling the sewer that you have 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you'll notice on this, we don't have any punch hole. How does a sewer know where to stop sewing the dart? On this particular kind of pattern, we don't have a punch hole. But the dart needs to end in the same spot. You'll see that this opening is not that big. So if we flip this as if we were going to sew it and line up the corners, where does the sewer stop sewing? Well, she's going to follow the shape, but it helps if she has an end point. Okay? So we're going to put a little mark where the punch hole would go, and the punch hole would go a 1/2 inch before the dart end, correct? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slit this pattern to that mark. So I'm cutting through the center of the dart and I'm stopping where the punch hole would go. That way, when this is folded and the sewer knows that she's following the shape of the seam allowance, and then she's going to sew a 1/2 inch past that slit. So when you are folding the intake, you can't do that. You have to give the sewer a punch hole. But if you have seam allowance, you're indicating that with a slit. So you would mark all of your notches. By squaring this, it makes it very easy to walk because these line up perfectly. Now, one thing you always want to look for when you are transferring darts, whenever you close the waist dart, you need to make sure that this is blended back into a smooth line. You don't want any odd shapes. So if it's not, you need to get your tools and you need to blend that out. I don't know if you can see this, but I have a tiny jog here. I don't want that jog there. So when I'm blending, basically I'm trying to join this side to this side. So you're going to find a spot on your ruler closest to your existing shape, and it might be subtle. That's like a 1/16 of an inch, but still it's a 1/16 of an inch that doesn't go there. I'm going to trim this. Now, you have notches here because you had a dart here. If you keep the notch, that's telling the sewer that this notch is going to match whatever this is sewing to. But if you don't need this notch, then you need to either white it out, or you can repair it by putting a piece of paper over your pattern so that it's not seen. Blending is important. Same thing here. This jog, I don't want this jog, so I'm going to go back and blend this line. So once you have everything done, that's how you transfer a dart.